The race is on, and with Charles Leclerc's frustration with Ferrari growing, are there signs that he's finally losing patience with the prancing horses' lack of progress? If so, what does that mean for his future, and what does it tell us about the problems of F1's most famous team? I'm Ed Straw, and joining me to tell all are Scott Mitchell-Malm and special guest Alex Jacques. Well, welcome to Alex Jacques, our special guest for this episode. Everybody will be very familiar with Alex's work as lead commentator on F1 for F1 TV and Channel 4, and also now an author.
Yeah, it feels a bit weird saying that in the company of actual print journalists, but I've come to flog the book. There it is. Flog the book. That's done. Grid to Glory, out on the 9th of October. Perfect Christmas present. There we go. Book plug done.
Excellent. And we have done a book club conversation for members of the Race Members Club on Patreon, so we'll be able to hear that in due course. Great chat about the book. Scott, should we get on to our main topic now, which is Charles Leclerc? Now, this was inspired from a question from the Race Members Club, which was from Ben Kelly, who asked, has Ferrari finally broken Charles Leclerc and made him want to look elsewhere for the future?
Well, a question from Ben Kelly, but I think also a topic that I think was covered by thousands of people on social media in the wake of Singapore, but probably half a dozen races, if not more, over the course of this season. And actually, I think one of the clips that was doing the rounds after Singapore was Lawrence Barretto's interview, podcast friend of ours, and obviously known associate of Alex. Lawrence is your executive assistant, right? Yeah. Where
that's your joke, not mine.
Where Lawrence asks one of those questions where it's like, it's a perfectly legitimate question. It's filled with just enough context that the driver's not losing interest in what's being said, but all of that context is just painfully, horrifically negative about Leclerc. And it's basically, I actually thought Leclerc did quite a good job of actually answering it, because he could have just sort of shrugged and just gone, well, yeah, it's not very good. But I think Leclerc, over the course of the Singapore weekend, was quite used to finding different ways to express his frustration and disappointment. And I would say, I've not seen him. I wouldn't pretend that I saw him in person in Singapore, but I've seen him at low points in the last few years. I remember Baku in 2022 when he'd been on that run and the loads of things happening, title chance slipping away. And I remember speaking to him. He had an engine failure in that race, if my memory's not failing me. And I remember then thinking, like, that's the most broken I've seen him, because it just felt like the realization of I'm not going to be world champion this year was already starting to set in. But everything, like, narrative-wise over the last few months has definitely, it's different. It's not like an in the moment, this specific thing sucks. It's like, the harsh way of saying it is like, it's almost like the penny's dropping, and he's realizing actually all this patience, all of this belief and hope that it'll all come together just isn't. And maybe he's starting to think that 2026 and the new rules is one last roll of the dice. So yeah, I think, look, has Ferrari finally broken him is a very blunt way of putting it. I would say Ferrari is testing his patience and exhausting his patience probably more than it ever has, and Leclerc has been through the ringer with that team, so that is saying something.
Alex, do you think this is Leclerc's frustration at the big picture? Because you could say Baku and Singapore, great tracks for him. He was optimistic. He said that himself. Relatively optimistic as you can be in a Ferrari this year. So it could have just been a bit dejected that he'd had two disappointing weekends. But would you agree there is something wider of, this isn't good, in his mind?
It's been a while, hasn't it? It's been a while. He's been associated with that program a long time. He knew he was going to get the chance with Ferrari for a while. He was F2 champion 8 years ago this week. So he's had this dream for a while. 2022 is the only time he's had a hint of a chance of a go at it. So you're looking at someone who's gone into preseason testing with hopes and dreams many times now. And I think testing his patience is a great way to put it. When you talk about the clip that was doing the rounds on social media, I thought you were going to say the supercut that someone did of him in the pen going, it's disappointing. Yeah, I'm disappointed. Someone's done a disappointing supercut, and they're just clips from this year. And eventually,
it's fertile ground, isn't it?
The difficult thing for him is he's 27. He's watching all the other drivers around him of his generation, a little bit younger, get a fair shake at a title. He knows in all probability next year, George Russell's going to get that shake at a title. He's seen the McLaren boys do it this year. He's not getting his chance. And I think for Ferrari to be so close last year, the expectation, okay, can I see off Lewis Hamilton? I've done the job in qualifying, and yet to be dropped back to fourth fastest. Everyone's got a breaking point. For an elite athlete to keep having his hopes built up and drop down, eventually there's a point where you lose faith in the project.
You picked up on that kind of coming into the season with big expectations, and the Leclerc Ferrari narrative is so frustratingly predictable now. It will go. He will have one of two seasons. He will have a season that either starts with lots and lots of expectation. He'll drive the car in testing. He'll do the first few rounds, and then it'll realise, this isn't actually anywhere near as good as we were hoping it was going to be. There'll be a bunch of disappointment. He'll get towards the end of the year. Things will start to pick up again. He'll end the year on a high. He'll go into the winter with a load of optimism, and that cycle will repeat itself. The other season is the one that's playing out now, which is you have all that disappointment at the start, but there's no pickup. And I would say one of the things that must be concerning him is that I don't really think his faith in Fred Vasseur is shaken as such, but I think he'll be disappointed that this has happened really for the first time in Fred's era running the team, because I think Vasseur joining Ferrari went a long way to restoring Leclerc's faith in the project. Yeah. Back when Mattia Binotto was there, that seemed to be only really heading one way. But Binotto leaving, Vasseur coming in did seem to buy Ferrari a lot of grace. He obviously signed that contract, Leclerc, at the start of last year, which takes him to the end of the decade, basically, with Ferrari. But how confident he is now versus a few years ago, like Alex mentioned, like he's been in part of this program for so long. When he signed that contract, the first one to come into Formula One with Sauber, but then Ferrari, he'd never have imagined he could potentially go to, a decade later and still not be a world champion. He would have just, you can never know, but he surely would have expected more by now. Yeah,
at least have had a chance at it. And he'll be very well aware, won't he? He's in F1 middle age now. He's still operating at good level. He's had a few iffy weekends this year, but most of his work this year, he's been genuinely good. And drivers are aware of this, aren't they? That particularly now, because it takes a long time. You need quite a long runway to turn a team around and take the step. Last year finished really well. Everybody was expecting, including at Ferrari, a title push this year, and it's just gone.
It's gone. And not only that, the drivers are now in the sim for the 26 cars. He will be getting a preview of what's to come. They don't exist in a vacuum. The paddock already has its pecking order mentally carved out. And if he knows that they've not nailed the new rule set, that's going to be playing a part of these reactions, because it could only be playing a part of these reactions. So if he's not liking what he's feeling in the sim for next year, that's only going to add into it as well.
Exactly. And he'll be thinking, well, if we don't start the new regs well, you just need to add that rule cycle to his age. And suddenly he's thinking, I'm not going to go. I always remember Daniel Ricciardo, I think it was after he was denied that Monaco win when Hamilton jumped him because there was the pit stop problem. And I think he talked about being aware that the kind of clock's ticking even then. And drivers know this, don't they? Your career can go past very, very fast. And when these teams these days, they're such juggernauts to turn around in terms of that slow turnaround to get yourself to the front. He'll be aware that he could be 33, 34 before he knows it and still be sat there on 138 pole positions and 15 wins or something.
He's going to have, he already has a ridiculous pole to win ratio, but he does run the risk of that only getting more ridiculous.
And that's not because he's a race choker. He often overachieves, or he's in a car that's good in quali, but just not there on race pace.
Yeah, exactly. But I think one of the things that must be on his mind, well, first of all, he is thinking that about 2026. He's on the record as saying that, he hopes that they start 2026 well, because if not, I think he corrected himself. He was going to say it'll be a few tough years, and then he went a couple of tough years. So he downgraded it slightly, but it still wasn't like if we start slowly next year, I'm confident we'll be bouncing back quickly. He's already putting it out there that get it wrong at the start and you'll be on the back foot for a while. And when I saw those quotes, I just thought, why has that been said? Like, why does that need to be said? Now, you could argue it's just Leclerc being really honest, and we know he's one of the more emotional characters. Good guy is Charles. He's a nice guy to speak to. But he's also very protective of Ferrari, and I think he does play the game quite well. I think he's quite good at not really saying anything when he knows he can't say anything. So to put that out there must suggest something. That might be that I don't think it's that he doesn't have faith, or that, the 26 car's awful in the sim or anything like that. But I wonder if it's that little bit of doubt creeping in that maybe we won't nail this, and if we don't, actually I'm in trouble, because you're right, people will be talking. I mean, I know from karting and junior single-seater days between drivers, you would have drivers would come in from test sessions and stuff like that, and they trade lap times, right? And I would be fascinated to learn what kind of goes on between some of these drivers who are a bit closer. Like, are they WhatsApping and exchanging? I was in the 26 car today, like, what lap times are you doing around Monza? God, it's weird, isn't it, where you have to downshift between Lesmo 1 and Lesmo 2. Like, some version of these conversations must be happening, and if they are, I'd love to know sort of like which way is it going for Leclerc and his interpretation of it.
So here's a scenario for you, Alex. Next year doesn't start that well for Ferrari, more of the same. Maybe they're the fourth best team, maybe they're even worse. What happens then? What does Leclerc think? Who's going to be interested in him? Is he going to be thinking this is the time to force a move?
Honestly, I think he would have to, on the evidence of his time with Ferrari, have to seriously consider a move. And if it goes the way that many in the paddock are thinking, he's looking for a Mercedes power unit. That's what I think he would have to consider. Now, eventually, and it's worth mentioning Fernando Alonso in all of this, because he's like a ghost of Christmas past, isn't he? When they're on a driver's parade with him, and they're like, man, they all know how good Fernando is, and they all know that he's got fewer titles than he should have. And that's getting the career move wrong a couple of times, and that can leave you 44, just being brilliant and giving us very entertaining team radio, but without a chance to compete for titles. So he would have to, for his, if this goes wrong, he's 27 now, he's 28, I think, this month. So you're looking at, he's 30 years old. There's still time to put it right. Get the career move wrong, and you're getting towards the mid-30s. You might not ever get a shake at a championship. We're not talking about, hey, it didn't work out and it all fell apart like late into the season. We're talking not even getting a proper chance to fight for a world championship. So yeah, he's going to have to consider a move, and the obvious one is, do you fancy a go with Adrian Newey designed Aston Martin, or do you try and plump for a Mercedes power unit? A lot of people will be very interested in signing Charles Leclerc, especially given we're going to get a rules reset. Imagine how effective Charles Leclerc would have been in what has been at points this year a qualifying championship.
You mentioned or described it as entering F1 driver middle age, which I think is a very good way of putting it. And I think you've used it a few times with different drivers, because it kind of encapsulates. I'm not,
you've not repetitive.
No, but it encapsulates that kind of that sentiment really well. But F1 driver middle age, this is where that kind of real life analogy is slightly different. Because that's really an F1 driver's like proper peak. Like that's where they're like really like at, whereas we're not talking real world middle age where like drivers are getting at that absolutely at their best in their 40s and 50s. Sorry, Fernando, to disappoint you about that. Really is what they want to be hitting their stride in terms of results, in terms of pulling everything together. By the time you're in your 30s, you only really probably have one, maybe two, but really probably one big move, one big contract left to get. Unless you properly extend your career. And Leclerc will be wary of that. He'll also, I imagine, be slightly wary of the fact that he's committed everything to Ferrari. He'll be being very well recompensed for it, but it hasn't paid off, and he'll be looking at the person who might very well be world champion this year and thinking, what the hell have you had to go through to get this? Now, Oscar Piastri had to sit out a season waiting for his chance in F1, but my God, did he get rewarded for that patience, and then obviously the aggression, as Alex mentioned, making the right career moves, spurning Alpine and getting in bed with McLaren was one of the best driver decisions of this century, and maybe in F1 history if he becomes a world champion. But Leclerc's got to be looking at that and thinking, I've been here for 8 years, 7-8 years now. This is his third season. How has he got this already? Yeah. And I'm still waiting to get past June in a championship fight. Like he that kind of thing has to be in his mind somewhere.
And just for the bigger picture for Ferrari, it does paint a pretty worrying picture, doesn't it? Because if 2026 doesn't start well, it's not just going to be Leclerc might want to move on. It'll raise questions about the Fred Vasseur regime, the technical team, and then even if Leclerc, let's say he wanted to stay at Ferrari, he'd be looking at it thinking, well, we're going to change everything. And then, as Fred Vasseur keeps saying, it takes ages to change a team, doesn't it? You've got these long lead times for bringing people in. Yeah. And then it doesn't take long for him to add up those numbers and think, well, then I'm going to be Fernando Alonso, aren't I? So there's that Ferrari's a kind of team that's teetering on the brink. It could go either way. They could start next year really well, and they're a title contender. The power unit package is great. The car's good. Leclerc's winning races. Happy days. But if I was going to back one eventuality, it's more likely to be the catastrophe one than the success one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if they're having nightmare test sessions behind closed doors in Barcelona, and then the cameras are there for the second Bahrain test, by the time that we get to the second Bahrain test, he's having to answer questions about what the season's looking like. And he's only got so much capacity to, as you say, he has held back fire on Ferrari in recent times. And the more honest he gets, I think the more he shows his true feelings. That the clock's ticking on it. If this doesn't go to plan, I think he is going to shop around purely because the age he is, and you can't bet on them doing a McLaren. It's very, very unusual to do what McLaren have done and turn it round in a rules cycle when they went from the back. And they managed to obviously do the double last week. So I think Charles Leclerc knows that he's going to have his most important career decision coming up. And if it's a poor start, it almost pushes him out the door.
And I was going to say, like, just to pick up on something you said about that, like, it takes time to do this. I would argue what McLaren's done has kind of made it's in a way, it's the exception that proves the rule. But it has also made a bit of a mockery of some of these bigger teams and the long-term projects and the excuses and whatnot, because they're different organisations for starters. So what McLaren can achieve in a shorter time is going to be different to Ferrari, which navigates like an oil tanker in terms of trying to actually affect change. Whereas at McLaren, it's a smaller organisation. It can be more nimble by design. But
it has taken McLaren really kind of 7 or so years, hasn't it? I think you can go right the way back to that Renault engine switch
for full
and the realisation
turnaround.
That's where the kind of the first, there was a phase that started there, and then there was another phase that started under this rule cycle.
Absolutely, but if you take it from the point where they got to basically Ferrari's level, which was late 2023, they've gone from that to winning a championship 12 months later to then dominating a season. Like, again, I'm not saying that Leclerc's looking at everything in blooming papaya and going, why can't I have that? But if he's looking at Piastri with a little bit of envy of like, you've got this chance so early in your career, when he keeps being told by Ferrari higher ups, it takes time, we need a few years to do this, we need years to get this person, and you look at McLaren and you go, you got Rob Marshall on board pretty quickly, you reorganised the technical structure pretty quickly, you went from the back of the grid to the front of the grid pretty quickly, and now you've won championships. How long does that really take? There are very valid reasons for it. I just think he is entitled to ask that question.
Yeah, I think the one thing we do have to state is that if we were talking not so long ago, we'd have said, well, wasn't 2024 a great success for them? They're looking good. There's been the change of technical leadership. Loic Serra's come in. This isn't a Loic Serra car they're in now. The Fred Vasseur revolution has, for the most part, been positive. It could just be that this is one car that they've got wrong, and the wider picture is fruitful and positive, couldn't it? We can't just react purely to lack of competitiveness and overreact, if you like.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think the really disappointing thing for Charles Leclerc would have been they answered so many questions that they hadn't done in his time. He was competitive in Austin last year, deep into the season. They developed the car well. They'd answered for the most part some of the strategy, as long as they stopped rolling the dice when there's a wet race. I don't know what they still do that now, but apart from that, they'd fixed so many things that had blighted his early time there. So then to revert back this campaign, that's why I think it's been such a gut punch for him. But yeah, it's a big move. I think the central question is he prepared to give his entire career to Ferrari and be happy with the fact that he'd be a modern day Jean Alesi and be associated with one team and one brand, and that was it? No elite driver I've ever met would be fine with signing up for never getting a tilt at the title. And I think that will decide things for him.
Absolutely. And as you said, Scott, he might not be there constantly saying, I want one of those orange cars. But one thing we know about these drivers, if they're not in a winning car, if they're not in a championship winning car, they are kind of glancing at the one that is and say, I should be in that. So that's just a reality of it. Right, we're going to go rallying now, which is very, very rare on the Race F1 podcast, although more in terms of going away from rallying, because not long before we started recording this, we had the news of Rovanpera 2 times World Rally Champion, absolute ace on the gravel, well, any other surface you throw at rally drivers. He's turning to single-seaters. So he's going to Super Formula. The plan is a couple of years in Japan and then go on to bigger things in single-seaters. He hasn't said F1, but that means F1, doesn't it? What do you make of this?
I love that he's trying it. I love that it's a bold call. He didn't need to do it. Incredibly talented going sideways, and has thrown it all in on a single-seater dream. You've just got to admire someone who's prepared to take that gamble with a well-paid professional rallying career, chasing something further. It's an amazing thing to do at the age he's done.
What do you think, Scott? Can he do it?
Yeah, he can. I think it's even less likely than the other interesting code switch we've got coming up, which is obviously Colton Herta, who's switching lanes but within the single seater world, so it's not a full code switch. Whereas this is so out there as an idea. Like, I love it. I'm here for it, and I'm going to be watching very, very much with interest next year. It's harder because he's got a tiny bit more time on his side than Kurt Herta. He's 2 or 3 years younger, I think.
No, well, funnily enough, we were talking about this before the podcast. It's only 7 months.
Is it?
The gap between them.
I can't tell whether that means that Rovanpera is older than I thought or Herta's younger than I thought. I don't know.
I think Herta's slightly younger than it feels.
Yeah, that's probably the case. What it will do is it will take him a bit longer. So let's say he does 1 or 2 years in Super Formula in Japan and then moves to Formula 2, which is his intention. By that point, if Herta's plan works out the way he wants, Herta's basically going to be on the brink of a Cadillac F1 seat. So he's further along in the process. Rovanpera needs more time to see if that works. He's also got more to learn, so it's a much steeper curve for him to move along. But let's say the fantastic ability that he has, and I remember when he did his Red Bull he did one of the many. This other Red Bull athlete drives one of their F1 cars. Like, it's such a cool thing that they can offer. I remember there being some feedback off the back of that he's actually quite impressive. And he's done obviously some circuit racing where he's been very good for someone who is not a circuit racer. Yeah. So let's assume it goes as well as he can hope in terms of his ability in Super Formula and then the switch to Formula 2. And then that goes well. I think he's got more options than Herta does. Herta's completely all in on Cadillac. It's Cadillac or bust. No one else really wants to give him a chance. He still doesn't have the super license, so there's all of that as well. But Rovanpera's links to Red Bull and Toyota are things that can just have such a tangible way into Formula One. It's very clear. Like, you can see a very clear path. It's a concrete affiliation. You know, Red Bull as a brand would love that kind of association. Helmut Marko would go absolutely bananas for the idea of doing something like that. Oh, I can see the kinds of quotes coming from him now in terms of, only Red Bull could pull this off, and this is such a Red Bull thing to do. It would really, really emphasise his slightly selective memory claim that Red Bull doesn't buy other people's drivers, it makes its own stars. Even though this would come from another discipline. They've got the 2 F1 teams, they've got the junior team, they've got the junior program. It's perfect. If it works, that comes together so beautifully. It's unlikely, but it's perfect. But the other one is obviously Toyota, which has the technical partnership with Haas. The rumours that they could potentially expand that in the future will never go away. And actually, both sides, when I've spoken to people, they're open to it. They're not ruling it out. It's further down the line. If that becomes more of a Toyota team, or even if it stays as it is now, Toyota's affiliation with Haas and the opportunities that they have wanted to give Toyota drivers with the testing of previous cars program really has meant Japanese drivers. Like, it's not just a free-for-all for anyone with a Toyota affiliation gets to do it. But this has been mapped out very much as, he's doing this with Toyota, like the switch and the new plan. So if he's really part of the Toyota Gazoo Racing family and taking it seriously, why not? Why would that not be something that Toyota and Haas go in 2 or 3 years' time? Actually, there's a lot to be gained from this. This could actually be quite a fun left field and successful thing to do. Why not go for it? So he's got options. It's just a ridiculous mammoth task for him to do. I can't wait to see how it goes.
And this is the great thing, isn't it? It's going to be such a great storyline because it's a throwback, really, isn't it? This code switching doesn't happen anymore. It's incredibly difficult because no matter how good you are, I've got no doubt he's got the physiology, the skills, the sort of basic driving toolkit is exceptionally high standard, but just all that knowledge and the data bank he needs to fill up, that's the big question, isn't it? That's what everybody's going to be watching for every little sign of.
Yeah, I just think it's a great story. We've had 2 in a row now. Maybe it's going to become more common. Maybe we're going to get constant code switching. We're like trying this year from NASCAR and coming to single seater, and it's never going to end. So great that he's trying it. Make no mistake, it's a mammoth task. It's a huge thing that he's undertaking. It's a big risk. Ultimately, though, if it doesn't work out, he knows he's quick going sideways. So there's a pretty useful championship to return to if it doesn't work out for him. And that's got to be the comforting thought when he tries something completely different. But as I said at the top, I just admire him for trying it.
Well, what I love is that he's doing it with this, ultimate F1 goal and doing it at the top in single seaters. Going into it, I know that it's obviously he's been at the very, very top of his game in his world, so you don't want to take too much of a backward step, even if you're going into a new discipline. Super Formula as the place to go into. I follow that championship, I would say, with reasonable casual interest. I'm not going to pretend that I'm anything close to an expert in it. I just know how hard it is and how highly drivers from F1, but also when I was working in Formula E and knew many drivers that had gone in there, team bosses and so on. It's a really high level, very, very powerful cars, incredibly difficult and technical tracks, absolute experts, like specialist drivers in that championship as well. That's amazing to have gone in at that level. And then you could argue that the Super Formula 2 F2 is sideways at best and maybe backwards in terms of the quality of the car you're driving and how enjoyable I imagine it would be and whatnot. F2 is a weird championship. We don't need to get into that now, but that's hard in itself. Do you remember? And this was another random Rebel Junior story, but when Pato O'Ward got that really short F2, was it like 2 rounds or 2 events?
He was definitely in Austria. I remember him being in Austria. It might have been more, but it was a very short stay, wasn't it? It was a strange one.
And he'd start and we've seen other drivers that have been out in Japan and then gone on to do different things to different levels of success. Like, that's not an easy thing to do, Super Formula 2 F2, but it is with F1 in mind. You're right, he's not gone so far as to say, I'm doing this because I want to be in F1 by season X, but he's talked about F1 being the highest level, and that's what he wants to compete at. And if all he wanted to do was be a professional circuit racing driver, he could go and enter the Le Mans 24 Hours next year. He could find a project that wants him to be a part of it, right? He's not doing that. He's happy to, he wants to do Le Mans, like many drivers. It's the kind of thing, it's not a consolation prize by any means, but it's if I can aim for this first, I'm gonna try and do this first. And I love the way he's going about it as much as I love the fact that he's doing it.
Well, to get a bit of a different perspective on this, I had a chat with David Evans, rally journalist extraordinaire from Dirtfish, which is your one-stop shop for rallying coverage, to get a little bit of an idea of how the rallying world sees this switch. So, tell us about Kalle Rovanpera and what we could expect from him.
Oh, Kalle Rovanpera, he stormed into rallying probably 10 years ago now, Ed. More than that? Or is he 20? He's 25 now. So, yeah, he started at 14. And suffice to say, you're not allowed to compete in many places in rallying at the age of 14. But Kalle found in Latvia, you could go and you could start rallying there. And you could actually compete in a championship at 16. And I think the first event he did in an R5 car, so what was a second tier car there, his first event, he won every stage, he won the rally, and a few months later became the youngest ever national champion, age 16. And the story just continued from there. Everybody's seen those videos of him driving a Toyota Starlet on a frozen lake at age 7 or 8. Do you believe in natural ability or not? I'm not sure. But from the very moment he could walk, his life was all about rallying, all about getting in a car and rarely getting out of the car. I'm not entirely sure he spent any time at school long enough at school to actually make some friends. And those friends, it's quite strange, he got into the sport and got into rallying and just never got out of it. Just spent his life competing, won 2 world championships, and then obviously at the end of 2023, at the end of his second title, he kind of realized that he'd missed his youth. And he'd missed so much of just hanging out and spending time with his friends. And that was a big kind of driving force in why he took this part program in 2024, just to kind of reconnect with all of the people that he'd missed. And, I'm fortunate that I always got on really well with his father, with Harry. And that translated. And I've always got on, and I've covered obviously Calais' career from start to where we are today. And it's great, you can see a very different Calais when he goes with his friends, when he goes for an ice cream and drives his big American car through the middle of Jyväskylä or whatever in Finland. And in the last couple of years, for sure, I have seen a change in Calais, in that when he won the championship in 22, it was everything. It meant everything. We were in New Zealand, and it was sensational. An incredible achievement for him. 23, I think as soon as he won it, he then realized he got that understanding of what being a world champion means in terms of being an employer of a global car manufacturer. And suddenly he had no time. He was here, there, Japan, everywhere. And I think that kind of wore him down into 23. Through 23, he won the championship. At the end of 23, as we said, he made this decision to go part-time. And I would say from probably mid-23 onwards, you could see a shift in Calais, that the same enthusiasm, the same desire wasn't quite there. But whenever you talked about, what are you doing next weekend? I'm going drifting. Then his eyes lit up again. And stuff like the stuff that he could do, the Porsche Carrera Cup races that he did, he loved it. And he just loved getting out and doing something different in a different car. Obviously, the Red Bull, the Formula One car, the RB8 that he drove at the end of last year, I think that potentially for me was when this decision was made. It really flicked a switch that, actually, I can do this. Or not I can do this, but, I have an idea of what to do in this car. And I firmly believe that all through this year, the decision's been at the back of his mind. It's certainly not one that he's rushed into. But he looks, it seems ridiculous, Ed, to say it, but at 25, he looks like a driver who is very much ready for the next step, for the next challenge. Obviously, when he won the championship in 23, he'd got 2, and there was no sign of him stopping. He'd got this dominance, and Sébastien Ogier was still on a part program of his own. And, Hyundai was really struggling. Tanak didn't look like he was going to come back as strong as he had been at Toyota. And suddenly you could look at Calais and think, wow, he could, for conceivably the next 10 years, he could win everything. And you put this to him. And I remember vividly, we were sat in a bar and I said, you could be doing this in 20 years. And you could see that he was kind of almost deflated at the prospect of doing that for 20 years. So maybe I was part of the decision. Maybe it was me that brought this decision about. I don't know. But no, he looks like a guy that's ready to go. And it's overwhelmingly, I'll be quiet in a second, Ed. I've talked for a long time. For me, when I heard the news, I was really sad because, he's a great guy. I consider the family as friends and what have you, and to think we'll be losing him, for me, it's a sad reflection on where WRC is right now. But then I talked to a couple of our colleagues here at Dirtfish, people much younger. Most people are much younger than me. And I said, what do you think? And they were like, oh, can't wait. It's going to be amazing. And that took me right back to do you remember when Loeb was trying to get his super license to do Abu Dhabi or somewhere like, I can't remember, end of 09. And all of the service part was talking about, wow, Sébastien Loeb's going to drive a Toro Rosso. And I was that person then at that point thinking, this is going to be amazing. We're going to take a rally driver and we're going to show him off in Formula One. So maybe it's a generational thing. But yeah, I felt quite sad. I now feel quite excited now I've spoken to him. And yeah, it's all you can do is wish him the best, all the best for the future.
So tell us about Rovanpera as a driver. Clearly phenomenal level of skill, no question about that. But I'm more thinking the technical side, the approach, the mindset, all those things he's going to need to be on top of to make this transition successfully.
I think, the one thing that Calais leans heavily on is that natural ability. He's a driver who came to the sport with plenty of a huge skill set. In our world, in my world, obviously, I have two drivers that I reference all the time, Richard Burns and Colin McRae. Colin McRae came with maximum talent and started driving a car at 110% and then came back to 100%. Whereas Richard Burns started probably 80% and built his skill set up to 100%. Calais is definitely the guy that came in at 110%. He has the talent. There's no doubt that he hasn't had to work as hard at driving the car and understanding what the car's doing as some of the drivers have. I think that I'm not sure he's the most technically minded. Of course, he understands. He's built cars. He understands exactly how cars work. But because he's got that much ability, he's never had to fully explore the full range of geometry settings or suspension or transmission or ramp angles or any of that. He probably has done. But his ability to drive a car has kind of built the speed for him. He's a driver that, he works in corners on the loose. He'd work the throttle really hard in the middle of the corner. He's not an early turn-in. He likes to slide the car quite a lot. We would call him quite an expressive driver. He leans a lot on the tyre. And you look at somewhere like, you ask Calais, where's your favourite event? And you'd naturally expect him to say Finland, but actually it's Estonia because it's quite a similar nature of really fast, lots of jumps, lots of really fast corners. But the surface in Estonia is just a little bit softer than Finland, so that the road will rut a little bit and just give you something that you can lean the car into the ruts, particularly on the second pass of stages. So, that's his kind of nature of driving. I think, one thing that indicates his ability to control a car is you look at what he's done in drifting. And I had no interest in drifting at all, but Calais obviously did some drift championships in Japan and what have you. So I took a bit of an interest, and actually Calais did and still has promised to teach me how to drift a car, which will be very entertaining when we get there. But he explained it incredibly, how precise you've got to be on the throttle inputs. And you can change the attitude of the car with a couple of mil more throttle or less throttle or whatever. So his ability to do that, I think that's something that you can really see in rallying. How relevant that will be in circuit racing, I don't know. What he does have is a sensational feel and an understanding of where the grip is. Rally drivers tend to come with that, don't they? I remember when Robert Kubica came to rallying, that was one thing that he really struggled with, was the fact that he'd grown up going round and round and round a circuit and understanding how a track could evolve and what would happen. And then he said, you come to a rally and you do a stage, and it was different from one corner to the next, the level of grip, with no real understanding of why. I think he has a good understanding of what grips beneath him. This is one of the issues that he's had this year, as we've had a tyre change. We've gone from a Pirelli control tyre to a Hankook tyre in WRC. And clearly this Hankook that we've got now it's more sensitive to a grip change. And that's really kind of upset Calais. Him and somebody like Thierry Neuville, they've really struggled to get on top of the tyre on gravel this year. So I think one thing that's going to be really interesting for me with Calais is the amount of work that he's now going to have to put in. He's been in WRC. He had half the year off last year. He's been back this year. It's obviously a very different car this year. We don't have hybrid. We have a smaller restrictor, so slightly less powerful cars. So he's had to work a little bit this year. But for me, next year, it's going to be huge. He's got so much to do, so much simulator work, so much testing, so much technical appraisal and understanding of what the cars are doing and what a tyre will do, what each tyre will do. That's going to be a big shift for him. He's ready for it. And obviously he wants it. And, you know, as I said before, you know, we've seen him kind of not drift, but he certainly, some of the passion had gone. It's back. You know, you can really see the desire to succeed in what he's doing next year. But I think he's going to have to definitely up his work rate, because he's been able to kind of cruise in WRC for a while. So yeah, but fundamentally one of the most talented, gifted and brave. You know, you don't see a guy winning Finland, winning Estonia at the speeds that he does without ultimate bravery in a car as well.
You've seen drivers make the transition the other way, going from single-seater racing into rallying. You've mentioned Robert Kubica, Kimi Räikkönen's another one. So you know exactly how difficult it is to change disciplines. Do you think that Rovanpera can make this work? Clearly, he has the ability to become a decent circuit racing driver, no question about that. But can he earn an F1 seat and do the job at that level? Can he break through?
I just don't know. I've thought about this pretty much non-stop, actually, since he made his decision. I've no doubt that, you know, he got into a Porsche Carrera Cup car with very, very little racing experience and won races. He, as a driver, over one lap, I would say absolutely. Absolutely, there's no doubt. You know, he can drive a car, he can understand. And one thing, after he came out of the Red Bull, he understood the aero, he understood how the tyre worked. That was within 50 laps of the Red Bull ring. He'd got it. So, you know, he will apply his skill set very, very well into single seaters. The thing that really concerns me, Ed, is the racecraft aspect. That, yeah, as I say, qualifying, no worries. But can he actually get in and mix it with a bunch of who are going to be considerably younger drivers? You know, if he makes it to Formula One, he's probably going to be 27, 28 years old. You know, that's 10 years older than some of the younger guys coming in. And those younger guys are Kalle Rovanpera at 17. They've spent 10, 12 years in karts. You know, they understand racecraft far, far better than Kalle will at any point in his career. So that's the bit that worries me. I think, you know, the fact that he's got the backing of Toyota, you know, the company is completely behind him. So, you know, any aspect of the kind of funding side of things is fine. You know, that's not to worry about at all. But he has the skill set, he has the mechanical understanding of how to get there. But, you know, my concern is, will there actually be a space for that story as well? You know, as a 27, 28-year-old two-time world champion, does Formula One need that kind of narrative of like, oh, somebody new coming in? When you look at when Räikkönen and Kubica came to rallying, it was huge. You know, it was a massive story in rallying. I'm not sure that Kalle getting to Formula One in 2 or 3 years will still be that big a story. I desperately hope it will be. And yeah, I think he knows it's going to be hard work. And I think it's quite sensible of him to go to Japan and do some single-seater learning at a very high level with very high performance, but a little bit quietly, and then come to Formula 2. Formula 2 is kind of the point that I think, you know, that could be the make or break, because it is, you know, it's a proper sort of dog-eat-dog world in there. And he will have a target on his back, won't he? You know, there's no doubt about that. And if he can survive that and he's got good racecraft, then we are talking about the 2029 Formula One world champion. Mark my words, Ed Straw. It's coming.
Well, for part 3 of the podcast, we're going to take on some questions from the Race Members Club. And remember, if you want to find out more about the Race Members Club, hit the link in the various descriptions, search for the race on Patreon. You'll be able to find out more about all the extra content we are doing. Right, Alex, a question from James Smith. The current pit lane battle for position in qualifying and even in practice sessions in Singapore is an unpleasant aspect of modern F1. What can F1 do to eliminate this at times farcical traffic jam situation and allow teams to run their optimum warm-up strategies so we get a genuine qualifying fight every race weekend?
It's a very good question. It is messy. I'd rather it be messy in the pit lane than messy in Sector 3 and risk cars on push laps coming across cars getting off the racing line, because I hated that even more. I quite like the idea of giving Jolyon Palmer a get on with it button that goes direct to the drivers, because that's usually what he says in commentary at one point. I prefer where we've got to in terms of a slow crawl out of the pit lane, because it was getting dangerous in Sector 3, but it is unedifying. And the fighting and appealing on the radio, oh no, he's jumped in, he shouldn't have jumped in. Obviously we saw a crash in practice, which, I mean, listen, everything blows up at the moment, doesn't it? But I didn't think it was a shattering moment that others seem to think it was, a minor collision in the pit lane. But it does show that it's perhaps gone slightly too far. Nothing springs to mind as a way to... The pit lane is the safest place to do it, but I know that usually when I look to the right of the commentary box and ask David or Jolyon, they just say get on with it. So that's going to be my answer.
You know the answer though, don't you? The simple answer, but it's actually complex in reality, is get better tyres. That's the answer, isn't it? That's the solution. Have tyres that we don't need to do these utterly ridiculous, microscopic levels of analysis to understand, good God, what the hell is this working window and how do we fix it? And like, I know that some teams, because it's real, like, and not just because the tyres are literally that colour, but it's like it's black magic, isn't it, in terms of trying to unpick and work it out. And Williams this year, I think, has been like there's always one, isn't there, that's like more perplexed than others, and Williams has been like that this year. Like Monza, like running so many different things through practice and qualifying itself. And I know that like if there was going to be absolutely, grain of sand analysis of Formula One, fine margins are right at the top of that in terms of what we talk about, and what everybody says decides what happens. So I'm not saying that there shouldn't be an element of tyre prep. Of course there should. It should be about bringing all these things together. It just feels like it feels like no one's particularly satisfied with kind of what needs to go through. And I don't want to say guesswork, because it does sound unfair, but that's at the heart of the problem, because I think it's important to say that, not just to be flippant, but because I think people, whether they're casual or even somewhat invested fans, will look at it and just go, why does it need to happen? But that's the answer, isn't it? The reason it has to happen is because if they're not going super slow there to get their gaps to manage their outlap, they're going to slow down massively somewhere on track to get their gaps, and not just do the outlap, but then run the lap that they want, which then comes into the whole, how far are you behind the car in front? Are you getting screwed by their dirty air, and so on and so forth. So it's the complexities of modern F1, the specific modern F1 that we have.
Right, the next question I'll throw at you, Scott, from Aaron Riley. With the likes of Red Bull and Mercedes getting in on the act in the last few races, are we starting to see a convergence at the top as well as the midfield as we get to the end of this rules cycle, and most, if not all, teams have moved focus to 26?
I don't think so. I think it's more that this is what we have seen at different times anyway, like over the last couple of years, where certain cars are slightly weaker on certain tracks, and those tracks then happen to be good tracks for other teams, like Mercedes, for example. I mean, it's not a surprise or a coincidence that Russell and Mercedes have gone well and won in Canada and Singapore, and then had a stronger weekend in Azerbaijan as well. The surprise for me has been that, like, a team like Ferrari, not to bash them again on this podcast, but hasn't done better on tracks where you're like, well, why? That's normally been great for you. So you've managed to bring your peaks down as well as the all-round nature of the car. So I think when you've got like McLaren, for example, actually developed their car quite a far way into the current season, which is why they stayed at the benchmark for so long. But then also, like, there was that point, I would say, round sort of 5-6 through to the summer break, where they seemed to go up to here because they just kept bringing little things to the car. They certainly wouldn't say they were little things. They were quite significant, whether it's aero, mechanical, whatever. They were even tweaking parts of the rear suspension, for example, I think in Austria in the middle phase of the season. But Red Bull's developed their car a little bit further. The Mercedes is still very good at tracks where the McLaren maybe isn't so good. So then that kind of compresses it in a certain set of circumstances. But I don't think it's necessarily that they're all coming down to the same kind of peak. I think if you look at the last 4 or 5 races, there's still quite a big gap between McLaren, and then Ferrari and Mercedes are actually quite similar. They're about 0.5% off in terms of absolute pace, and that's quite a significant deficit. That's 2 or 3 tenths, isn't it, over a normal lap? And you wouldn't say that's massively close.
Right, a question I'll take from Jake Nelson. What's the point of front wing end plates? Leclerc in China and Norris here in Singapore. Also examples in previous years of damaged end plates seeming not to make difference to pace. Well, under the current rules, actually, the end plates aren't that important aerodynamically. They're there on a very tight geometry to limit outwash. You need them there structurally to kind of hold bits of the wing together. So actually, they're not really a performance part so much. There's a few things you can do. But if they're flapping around, as long as it's structurally sound, they won't make a huge difference.
What's the most superfluous piece of bodywork on the car as far as you two are concerned? Like, visually, what's the point of that? Not just aerodynamically. Performance-wise, I'm sure they will do something.
I feel like you've got.
No, I don't know. No, it just occurs to me because that question, the phrasing of it, really tickled me. Like, what's the point? What's the point of this? I love it. Yeah. I always found it really fun. You know, in the era of like the ridiculous barge board arrangements, where they were just incredibly complex. And you remember Renault had that design where they made it look like a cat because it was just like, it was so like intricate on the side of it. I always looked at that and just thought, what? Come on. I know that this is serving a purpose, but this is silly. Is there anything like that on the modern F1 car as far as you're concerned?
That's a good question. Yeah, you've put me on the spot then. Have you got one, Alex?
Not off the top of my head. No, it's a very good point though, isn't it? I mean, there used to be, in years gone by, there used to be all sorts of aerodynamic devices where you're like, this is just overkill. But
we get silly stuff now, don't we, around like flicks and stuff, fairings and elements around like the halo.
I was going to say, aero on the halo is ridiculous. When there used to be the
but inevitable, right?
Yeah, like, when the era of Formula One, when you had an element that went over the nose that was attached to the front wing, I was like, guys, come on, this is getting ridiculous. Sort of 2008 time.
When you saw the 2008 cars when you were at Silverstone for the Silverstone Festival, that must have been like a real like blast from the past, because when I see photos of those cars, having watched them as a young fan on television, they would have seemed so normal to me at the time. And now when I see images of them, I think, what were we thinking? Like, it was such a strange era. And you look at it now, like they're so prescribed now. So we don't have anything like that anymore, which is a shame.
Yeah, the thing is that, if you see a 2008 McLaren, it's quite grating. But the thing is, it's all there for a reason. And the gain might be infinitesimal, but as long as it's measurable, it's worth doing, which is what I quite like about Formula One. So I'm going to give the boring engineering answer and just say, well, they all justify their place. But we are seeing more of these things that are prescribed to have making following easier. And that's what the end plates are partly about. Right, a question now for you, Alex, from Zephyr, who says, I've got a proposal for what to do with sprints. Make them time trials for a number of laps equal to the median option tyre stint length. Other sports like cycling have this as a key element of the competition. And I think there's probably a way to space out the vehicles such that everyone's far enough from everyone else, probably by taking a long time and absorbing sprint quali. So not all cars are on track simultaneously. I think as a measurement of performance, it'd be fascinating. Time trials, what do you think?
It would be fascinating. I'm thinking about how you'd commentate on it coherently. And
that's exactly why I asked you the question.
Yeah, I think that would be somewhat tricky to do. I like the idea of doing it on a street circuit where perhaps you're not going to get. I mean, we've got a sprint in Singapore next year, so I wouldn't mind trying it there. But complex to tell that story.
That it's reminding me of. I can't remember whether this was a one-season wonder or longer. Do you remember when the World Touring Car Championship a few years ago had the time trial element of? I
do, and that's exactly why before this I messaged our colleague Jack Cousins, who was heavily involved in World Touring Cars at the time, to ask him about it, because they did it for a few years and it was kind of all right, got a bit predictable in the end, and then they kind of dropped it, but that was partly because I think they only had 2 manufacturers left, so it got a bit dull. But yeah, they did that.
It was pursuit running, wasn't it? Basically,
they run them like a cycling time trial where you have the team cars running together.
That's it.
So yeah, I don't think it was super. It was an interesting idea.
I'm curious to know what you think about this, because for me, this is like the ultimate competition here between your known affection of cycling and your known disdain for sprints. So where are you at right now? Is part of your, like, one side of your brain just going, what a brilliant idea, and the other part of your brain just going, oh, go away, sprints.
It's quite an interesting idea, because I did wonder when I read this question whether, well, maybe you could make that effectively the you could make that the qualifying thing, and that sets the grid order. But the downside of that is that then means you're pretty much guaranteed the sprint race is more predictable because everybody's in pace order even more than they would be. So, but I do wonder, because this is what we talk about, that if you try and make another session, more sessions less competitive, rather more competitive, the Domenicali Dream, it's an interesting little idea for something that could be interesting. But I suspect it would be more interesting for the hardcore than for people watching at home and listening to you trying to make it interesting. I suppose you could find ways, if you've got a few cars running, or if you do the two car, whether you have the two cars together, but then you've got dirty air for one of them, or if you could have the splits from one car to another, could that kind of work? Or do you think people would just think, I think an actual sprint race would be better than that, but I did wonder if you could feed that into a sprint weekend as another component.
I like the idea of trying almost anything and experimenting with the format, but I think it would be tricky for the modern TV product to tell that story effectively.
How sarcastic would Jolyon's commentary get?
I mean,
that
is my main worry, if I'm honest, because we're always starting a weekend at a 70% anyway, right? So if that's on Sprint Friday, one of the first things we go into to set the grid, then I've got to deal with him at 90 for the rest of the weekend.
It'd be interesting to get that sort of absolute race pace indicator, but at the same time, it would have changed by the time you get to the race potentially, because people have got different approaches, and obviously even when they do the long runs on the Friday, one of the reasons why they're not accurate in terms of fully predicting what you're going to see in the race is because they change setups, they change approaches. Sometimes you go harder deliberately at the start of a stint to see how they stand up. Sometimes you think, we're a bit gentle on that. So, but it's an interesting little idea, and those are the kind of ideas that it's great to sort of throw into the pot, because I think my biggest problem with the sprints, and I won't endlessly repeat myself, is just I am repeating myself, but if you're going to do them, I think you need to make the things stand out a little bit more. And that's the thing that I think F1 has been a little bit fearful of doing, because there's been a lot of pushback. So yeah, I think it's interesting to consider such ideas. Right, Scott, a question from Jonathan Williams for you. With Yuki Tsunoda rumoured to be out of Red Bull next season, how do you feel his season has gone? And is he in trouble due to his hard Honda connections for next year? His Honda connections aren't that hard now, are they? Or at least won't be next year.
Not next year, not within the Red Bull family, no. They're pretty rock solid at the moment, and played a part in him getting the seat when he did, and how he did. It's always been a slightly complex relationship, because he was a Honda junior first and foremost, then technically a Red Bull junior, but there's always been a bit of Honda facilitation, shall we say, of his various opportunities. He had to come into Red Bull and just absolutely own that second seat, really stake a claim on it. I feel to be able to exist in the Red Bull ecosystem without that Honda element, I feel just needed something more than he's done. His season's really hard to judge, because how do you judge anything that happens if in a Red Bull not driven by Max Verstappen? Because I often find drivers can be a little bit guilty of rewriting history once they've left a team, or it's not gone as well as they've wanted, or what changes. But I actually think Sergio Perez was right with what he said when he was announced as a Cadillac driver, where he said that he thinks more value is being put on the job he did at Red Bull now, and I think he's right. I've said this a couple of times, I think, on this podcast. I think we do need to reappraise the job that Perez did. I'm not saying that what he did at the second half of last year was good, or good enough to keep his seat necessarily. I understand why Red Bull felt they needed to make a change. But actually, clearly he was doing all right still, even though it looked terrible to us from the outside. How many drivers will need to go in and replace him? If Isaac Hadjar goes in at the start of next year and does replace Tsunoda and spends the whole year finishing between 9th and 15th, then it's another driver that's gone in and basically can barely score points in that car. So reappraise Perez. I still think it's unfair that Liam Lawson didn't get more than 2 race weekends as a Red Bull driver. And then actually judging a Tsunoda season, it's just, I don't think it's been good, but I can't tell whether it's been all right in the circumstances or an absolute disaster, because you look at the pure results and it's a disaster. In terms of the results, it's a disastrous season, but it isn't. The flashes, the fact that he's got closer at times as a Verstappen teammate over one lap than anyone since Daniel Ricciardo at a couple of tracks, certainly Spa, for example. Those are good things. So it's really hard to unpick. But I personally don't think he'll be there next year. I don't think he's done enough for what he had to do.
Well, the final question I'll take from Ben McBride. Singapore has a sprint next year. Are you looking forward to the extra sleep opportunity it provides? It's not so much needed at Singapore because for some reason in Singapore, I don't know why, feels like there's 30 hours in a day. It's the only track this happens. It doesn't happen in the other weird time races, but I always feel like there's more time in Singapore. I don't think that's what the question was about, though. While my initial reaction to Singapore is thinking, sprint there's not perhaps the best choice, I am quite interested because it'll be in that day session slot. So that could add a little bit of interest to it because that'll be something a bit different. We haven't seen a day race for F1 in Singapore before. Alex, you're going to be the one who's there calling the Singapore sprint. Yeah. So what do you reckon?
I also like the fact that we're going to get one practice session in the day and then that's your practice done for the rest of the weekend. That is a very, very odd, because we always do with that session. All right, welcome to FP1. We're excited to be in Singapore. By the way, this is completely unrepresentative, which always feels
welcome to the most
to
pointless 60 minutes of the season.
This is waffle, essentially.
And, is that when Stefano Domenicali gets a message to you? She's like, talk it up.
Yeah, we get the red phone rings. No, there is no red phone. I am contractually obliged to say there is no red phone.
No, it's blue, isn't it?
But that'll add an interesting element to it. Calibrate your car in a daytime session for the rest of the nighttime weekend is an interesting part of it. You never know. You never know what you're going to get with Singapore. I just want them to push. I just want them to be completely flat out. And it always feels like the end of the year, we get to Brazil and they're like, if for whatever reason, I don't know whether it's Brazil or I don't know whether it's the end of the season, and they're like, right, okay, let's have it. We're gonna race this with the same intensity that we would the first half of the Grand Prix, and that one always feels fantastic. Singapore, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, and obviously the problem is it is difficult to follow in Singapore. Interlagos is a good race for passing, good track for passing, so that does help it. But I guess the other thing is the selected sprint races next year were slightly surprising, but we are moving to universal sprints eventually, aren't we? I mean, that's not something they've said, but we're certainly going to go to more. 6 next year. I can see it then going to 10. And I think there's going to be a point where it's going to be like MotoGP and it's universal sprints. So you need to have sprint races at not ideal venues to see how they work.
Do you want to know my slightly tinfoil hat theory about the sprint choice for next year?
We love a tinfoil hat.
So I don't actually know if I actually believe this or not, but like it's just when you get a thought sometimes, you're like, could this be the reason? I wonder if in 27 we're going to go up to 10 or 12 sprints, and then a bunch of the good sprint tracks are going to come back. And then it's going to feel like, actually, like those are good additions to the sprint calendar. Because if you'd added the couple of the tracks that are coming on for sprints next year, if you'd added those as extra sprints, I would just be looking at that and thinking, "What? This is just crap. Like I don't want more sprints, and I definitely don't want more sprints here." But if you get rid of a couple of tracks that have maybe been slightly better for it, or in theory are good for it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what's the sprint? The sprint calendar for next year includes China, Miami and Singapore, doesn't it, as well as some others, and Zandvoort, because it's the last Dutch Grand Prix. Great, we're having loads of sprints on tracks that just historically have no overtaking, basically, or no legitimate overtaking. There was a Dutch Grand Prix, wasn't there, like a couple of years ago, where it like officially had like the most overtakes in a race. And I was like, what? I watched that race. There was what overtaking? So I don't know. I might be massively out of line to even consider it as an option, but the cynic in me did look at that and just think, I do wonder. Mate, it's nicer, isn't it? It's nicer to add the good tracks back than it would be to expand it by adding rubbish ones.
What a theory. Montreal and Silverstone are the other two that you didn't mention, I think. I did have to just double check that because I'm very, very bad at knowing where sprints are. And when they often take me by surprise on race weekends, in fact. So
have we got one in Austin?
There's one in Austin.
Yes. It's not in my brain at all. I can't get into this schedule whatsoever.
I'll just throw one final question to you, Alex, on the sprints, because although I'm sometimes critical, I do quite like the intensity, even if they're not that lively as races. They feel like they last about a minute. I imagine probably feel like they last about 10 seconds in what you're doing. But I quite like that sort of intensity of them, at least, even if they are a little bit processional. So they sort of have their place, even though I continue to feel that they're just a bit underutilised, given they're just a mini Grand Prix.
Yeah, it's a strange thing, isn't it, when it is a sprint weekend and the paddock's like, oh, yeah, sprint weekend, isn't it? And everyone has to. And the great upshot of it being in that format is that everything is of consequence quicker. And you're not spending 3 hours pouring through what might be, what could be, theorizing. You're getting actual tangible results. So we will get that in Austin. The races feel very, very quick, and you get the sense of when the drivers have settled for their position. And that doesn't always go to the end. But yeah, from a commentary perspective, you're absolutely right. It flies by. And then if you get an intense sprint like we've had in the past with Sao Paulo, you spend longer analysing the race than the time that we actually spent going around in the circuit. Which is slightly odd from a broadcasting perspective.
Yeah, but I think one thing's for sure, we're going to see more sprints in the longer term. But thanks very much to everybody who sent in questions. Thanks to Alex and to Scott. And one last attempt to plug your book, Alex, just to sign off.
Yeah, there we go. Grid to Glory, out now. Great for a Christmas present. There we are, plugged.
Excellent. Plugs at both ends of the show. So, yeah, we've held up our end of the bargain. But no, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, it's been great to have you, and great to have you as well, Scott. Don't want to leave you out. I thank you twice, but that's more than you deserve.
Much appreciated. I agree.
But anyway, we've got lots more to talk about. We've got more Grand Prix coming up, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.